first thing I did was the checklist. Hazmat runs were never casual, not even on a quiet night. I checked seals, placards, weight, paperwork. When everything matched, my chest loosened a little. Routine was how I stayed calm. I was young, but I trusted procedures more than mood. The highway ahead was the boring kind of empty. Flat desert, no curves, no towns, no real exits. Just lane lines sliding under my headlights in a steady rhythm. I liked that. With fewer variables, the truck became a simple system I could read. I kept the cab quiet. No music, no talk. Sound distracted me, and distraction caused mistakes. The CB stayed on low, only for warnings. I was tired in a controlled way, dry eyes, sharp thoughts, hands that felt steady until I looked at them. I had been taking too many shifts, trying to get ahead of bills that never stopped. A hazmat load paid better, but it also meant my smallest error could be final. So I drove like a machine, careful and consistent. A reflective sign flashed by on the right. Mile 44. I noted it without thinking. Mile markers were proof that time moved forward, even when the scenery did not. About half an hour later, the same reflective sign appeared again. Mile 44. My mind stalled on it, like a gear that refused to catch. I had not turned. I had not exited. I had been driving straight. For a moment, I wondered if I had misread it the first time, the way tired eyes can turn one number into another without you noticing. I told myself the sign might be playing tricks too, a desert mirage of reflective paint, the kind that looks solid until you get close and realize your brain filled in the rest. Annoyance came first. Annoyance was easier than fear. I checked the clock, my speed, the trip meter. The numbers said I had traveled. The road said I had not. I told myself the sign was wrong, a replacement put in the wrong spot. It happened. Humans made mistakes. I slowed a little and searched for an explanation. Cones, a work truck, a detour. There was nothing. The desert beyond the shoulder was a black plain. The horizon was the same line. I considered pulling over, but stopping with hazmat felt like inviting trouble. I kept going, expecting mile 45 to appear and end the thought. The next sign was mile 44. Something shifted inside me, not panic yet, but the feeling that my logic had lost its grip. I reset the trip meter again. I watched miles climb. The lane lines flowed. The world stayed identical, like a looped video. I checked GPS. The screen flickered, showed a straight route with no map around it, then went blank. My phone had no signal. I tried to treat it like a mechanical issue. Restart, wait, confirm. Nothing changed. Outside the windshield, the highway was still a ruler line into darkness. I started testing reality in small, controlled ways. I changed speed, then held it steady. I drifted within the lane and corrected, watching the steering response. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, drank water, and focused on the taste. Inside the cab, everything behaved. Engine normal, gauges normal, vents normal. Outside, the road never evolved. The silence stopped feeling neutral. It felt like attention, like the desert was listening for me to admit I was lost. That was the worst part. If I could find one clear fault, one simple cause, I could fix it. Instead, I had a straight line and a repeated number, and my own mind turning into a crowded room. I turned up the CB and pressed the mic. I spoke in my normal professional tone. Any drivers out here, anyone near mile 44, I need a radio check. I released the button and listened. Static came back, then a voice cut through it fast and strained. The voice was mine, Not similar, mine exactly. Same breath, same cadence, same slight edge I heard when I was stressed. It was not answering my question. It was describing something. Do not brake. Do not touch the brakes. You are going to want to brake, but you cannot. You will see it ahead. You will think you have time. You do not. My skin tightened. I pressed the mic again. Who is this? I released it. The voice continued like it had not heard me. In 10 seconds, you will feel the road shimmer. In 9, in 8, you will think it is heat, but it is smoke. In 7, in 6, your dash will flicker once. In 5, in 4, you will lean forward. In 3, in 2, you will see the wreck and you will brake. If you brake, you will roll. I tried to interrupt again, louder, like authority could change physics. Stop talking, this is my channel. I released the mic. The voice kept going, calm and terrified at the same time. Your trailer will swing, the weight will shift, the straps will snap like whips. You will feel the cab lift. You will hear glass. You will smell fuel and hot metal. You will not have time to think. I stared into the road until my eyes hurt. A faint haze hovered over the asphalt ahead, thin and pale, wrong for the desert night. I had been about to dismiss it as dust. Hearing it predicted made it heavy. My stomach tightened the way it tightened before a real failure, the moment when a small noise becomes a large problem. I tried to shut the radio down. I lowered the volume. The voice softened, but did not stop. I turned it off. The speaker went quiet for a beat, then the same voice returned anyway, as if distance no longer mattered. You will try to slow down carefully. You cannot. You will panic. You will brake. That is the mistake. My heart hammered, but my face stayed still. Fear was useful only when it became procedure. I repeated that in my head. I checked gauges again, as if numbers could protect me. Everything was steady. The steadiness felt staged. I pressed the mic again, quieter. If you are me, then tell me what to do. I released it. Hold the wheel. Keep it straight. Do not brake. If you try to avoid it, you will tip. You have one option, and you will hate it. The haze thickened into a dirty fog that swallowed the far end of my beams. My hands trembled once, then locked. The urge to brake rose like a reflex, the old safe rule of driving. I could feel my foot hover, ready to do what it had done 1,000 times. My logic tried to argue that braking was control. The voice answered the argument before I finished it. It is there. You see it now. You are going to brake. Do not. Do not. Orange light flared in the fog. Shapes formed, twisted metal, black smoke, a hard angle across the lane. Then it snapped close, too close. An overturned truck, burning. My truck. Same hazard placards, same reflective tape. The wreck lay across the highway like a wall. My foot lifted, ready to slam the brake. Every cell in my body screamed for it. The voice on the CB turned frantic, describing impact, describing the roll, describing my body inside a cab that was no longer upright. I made one clean decision. I gripped the wheel and floored the gas. The engine roared. The truck surged forward. I stared into the burning shape until the last moment. Then I closed my eyes. I expected the crash. Instead, I felt a brief wash of heat, like passing an open furnace, and a sharp smoke smell. Then it vanished. No impact, no jolt, only tires on asphalt, steady and alive. I opened my eyes. The darkness was thinning. the horizon a pale line. The fog was gone. The road ahead was empty. The CB was silent, no static, no voice, no echo of me. A sign slid past on the right, mile 45. Relief hit late, like my body needed proof. I eased off the gas, careful not to stomp the brakes. The truck stayed stable. The load stayed stable. The world behaved again. When the shoulder widened, I pulled over and stepped out. Cool air, dry, normal. I looked back down the straight highway. No wreck, no smoke, no marks. Just empty road fading into sunrise. I tried to build an explanation that fit my rules. Microsleep, stress, a prank, a malfunction. But one detail refused to cooperate. That voice had been me, perfectly me, describing my death second by second like memory. I drove on under the rising sun, and the desert looked honest again. I did not. Since that night, I read every mile marker twice. I hesitate before I press the CB mic, every time. If I hear static, my shoulders tighten before my mind can explain why. And when the road is perfectly straight and the cab is perfectly quiet, I wonder if I escaped because I solved the loop, or because it decided to let me go this time. The yard lights were too bright for the hour, cold white lamps that made every puddle look like glass. I signed the paperwork and tried not to stare at the totals. If I stared, I would start doing math, and math always led back to my debt. I had slept maybe 2 hours, the kind of sleep that feels like nothing. Insomnia was not dramatic for me. It was just another part of the job. The company knew I would take the worst routes. I was the guy who said yes when others said no, because the extra pay sounded like oxygen. I did my walk around by habit, checking straps, tapping tires, counting lights. A long load sat under a dark tarp on the trailer, strapped tight and ordinary. Timber, I assumed. I climbed into the cab and felt that small, private relief, the only space that felt like mine. I drove in silence because I hated the radio. Silence kept me steady. The only thing I left on was the CB, turned down low, just in case. By the time I reached the mountain pass, the weather had turned from bad to useless. Fog thickened until my headlights hit it and came back at me, and the road felt like a tunnel. Pine trees stood close on both sides, massive trunks rising into darkness I could not read. The pass narrowed and twisted, and there was no shoulder that felt safe. Pulling over here meant sitting half in the lane, and stopping on a wet incline meant risking a slide I could not correct. I kept moving, slow and careful. In the rearview mirror, the trailer was a shadow behind me. The first time I saw the tarp lift, I told myself it was wind. The straps were tight. I had checked them. Then the CB crackled, and a voice came through, not a call sign, just a thin whisper buried in static. "Your load is too heavy. Leave it." I waited for laughter, waited for someone to answer, waited for the message to make sense. Nothing came. Only static, then the whisper again, calm as a thought I did not choose. I adjusted the radio and turned it down, telling myself it was bleed through. A few bends later, I checked the mirror again, and the tarp did not look like wind anymore. It shifted in slow waves, like something large was changing position underneath. The grade steepened, and the truck started to feel wrong. Not just heavy, but held. I pressed the accelerator a little more, then eased off because the road was slick. The engine labored, and the speed still dropped. It felt like the trailer was being pulled backward, gently but constantly. I tried to solve it like a professional. Wet road, brake drag, load settling, a problem I had not noticed yet. I watched the gauges, and everything sat where it should, and that made my stomach tighten. In the mirror, the movement grew deliberate. A slow crawl from one side to the other, a rounded bulge that rose, paused, then sank. The CB whispered again, "Your load is too heavy, leave it." I spoke into the mic, asking if anyone was on the pass. No one answered. I turned the CB off. The cab went quiet for a beat, and then the whisper returned anyway, leaking through the speaker as if the power was still on. I yanked the cord free. For a second, there was only the engine and rain. Then the whisper came again, thinner, like it was coming from inside the dash. "Leave it." The fog pressed close to the windows. The trees flashed past like dark pillars. I could not stop to check the trailer. The road would not allow it. Whatever was back there did not rush me. It moved when it wanted, and it made sure I saw it. The longer it went on, the more it felt like a game where I did not know the rules. Every time I told myself it was just a shifting load, the tarp would move again in a way that looked intentional, like it was answering me. I kept thinking about the money for this run. I pictured the overdue notices on my kitchen table, the tired look on the landlord's face when I asked for more time. I told myself I would not let fear ruin a paycheck. Then the truck slowed another few kilometers an hour, and the thought stopped feeling brave and started feeling stupid. My palms were slick on the wheel. I swallowed and forced my breathing down, slow in, slow out, like I was talking myself through a panic attack without letting my voice escape. The whisper kept returning at odd moments, sometimes stretched out by static, sometimes clean and close. "Your load is too heavy, leave it." It was not ordering me. It was advising me, like it cared about me more than my company did. That made my skin crawl. Small things inside the cab started to feel wrong. A damp smell like cold soil. A slow fogging spot on the passenger side window, as if someone had exhaled near it. The sleeper curtain behind me, barely trembling even though the vents were steady. I told myself it was vibration. I told myself I was tired. The truck crawled higher, and the incline grew steeper, and now the speed dropped so low I could feel it in my teeth. The engine sound dipped, and for a moment it felt like the cab leaned backward, like the trailer had decided it would not be pulled any farther. I reached down toward the emergency trailer release controls, the ones I had only used in training. My fingers shook. I glanced at the passenger seat and saw mud on the floor mat, a wet smear near the edge. On the lower lip of the glove compartment, there was a single wet print, fingers pressed there for balance. The fog outside was thick, but this was inside. I kept my eyes forward. I did not turn around to check the sleeper. In the mirror, the tarp bulged once, as if it reacted to my hand. The whisper came again, not from the CB now, but close to my left ear, mixed with static that did not belong in open air. "Your load is too heavy. Leave it." I pulled the emergency release. The connection broke with a hard snap, and the feeling of being dragged backwards stopped instantly, like a hand let go. The truck lurched forward, suddenly light. I looked back just long enough to see the trailer settle in the lane behind me, a dark shape swallowed by fog, the tarp still moving in slow, patient waves. Then I drove. I drove down the pass, careful and desperate, not fast enough to lose control, not slow enough to give it time. When the sky began to pale, dawn did not feel like safety. It made everything look ordinary, and ordinary made me feel unreal. I pulled into a safe area and sat with my hands on the wheel until my phone found one weak bar. I called dispatch and gave them the location. trying to sound like a driver reporting a mechanical emergency. I said the trailer was too heavy. I said the road was unsafe. I said I detached to avoid an accident. Dispatch was quiet, then asked what trailer number I had. I told them. Another pause. Then the dispatcher said my name carefully and told me I had not picked up any cargo that night. I was sent to bring the truck back empty. No load was assigned to me, no tarp, no timber, no paperwork on file. He asked if I was feeling okay. My hand still remembered the pull of the incline. My eyes still remembered the tarp rising like a slow breath in the mirror. I drove back to the yard in daylight and looked for proof, a missing record, a camera angle, anything. The logs did not match my memory. I asked them to check the gate camera, to check the yard logs again, to check my GPS. A supervisor humored me and pulled up the route, then shrugged like it proved nothing except that I drove where I said I drove. They sent a pickup to the pass after sunrise. It came back with an empty report. No trailer, no tarp, no blocked lane, just wet pavement and fog lifting off the pines. A day later, I drove up there myself in daylight, and the road looked clean, like my whole night had been erased. The checkout notes showed an empty return. I stopped telling the story after that. I kept working because debt does not care about fear. But the past changed me. I check the rearview mirror, even when I am driving with no trailer. I keep the cab too clean, wiping at nothing, watching the passenger side glass for the smallest fogging spot. I do not use the CB anymore, but sometimes, in the dead center of silence, I still hear that thin static whisper like a thought pushed into my skull. Your load is too heavy. Leave it. And what eats at me is not the idea that something moved under the tarp. It is the idea that it knew exactly when I was too tired to fight. I have been hauling a refrigerated trailer long enough to trust routine more than luck. Lock the doors, scan the mirrors, park where there are lights and other trucks. If a place feels wrong, keep moving. I follow that rule because I have seen what happens when people get casual at night. The rain was heavy and constant, loud enough to flatten the world into one gray sound. I had a morning delivery window and a reefer unit humming steady behind me. I told myself I was fine until my eyes did the thing I fear most. A blink that lasted too long. My head dipped, the lane line slid under my tire, and I snapped awake with my heart climbing my throat. I checked the clock. 3 a.m. I could keep going and pretend it was nothing, or I could pull over before fatigue decided for me. The next proper rest area was too far, so I took a small truck parking pull off that I already disliked. Trees packed tight on both sides, one dim street lamp flickering over wet pavement and muddy edges. I eased the truck into the thin light, parked, and kept the engine running for a moment just to feel less alone. Then I shut it down. Rain on the roof, reefer hum, nothing else. I did my checklist anyway. Doors locked, windows up, quick scan of mirrors, nothing moving that I could see. I pulled the curtains closed because I wanted sleep more than I wanted to think. I told myself it would be 10 minutes, just enough to reset. I was drifting when a sound cut through the rain, a soft step in mud, close, then another, then a light tap on metal. At first I tried to fold it into the storm. Water hits everything. Wind moves loose parts. Mud shifts under tires. I waited for it to fade into randomness. It did not. The tapping came back with shape and timing. Tap, tap, pause, tap. The footsteps moved along the trailer, slow, stopping to tap, then moving again. No rush, no fumbling. I told myself it was another driver doing a walk around, or someone checking his own rig and using the trailer line as a guide in the dark. I told myself nobody would choose this place for trouble in a downpour. I told myself I was half asleep, and half asleep is when your brain turns normal noises into footsteps. I tried one more excuse: an animal, a deer or a dog nosing around the mud. But the rhythm kept returning, clean and deliberate, like someone practicing a signal. I checked the door lock with 2 fingers and kept my phone dark. Calling the police felt impossible with no clear details, and the idea of speaking out loud felt worse, like it would confirm I was awake and alone. I pulled the curtain back a fraction and kept my face away from the glass. The lot outside was a blur of rain and flickering light, and then I saw a soaked silhouette standing in the downpour, angled toward my window. It was motionless. It did not wave. It did not knock. It looked directly at the place where my head would be, like it already knew. My stomach tightened. The figure drifted out of the street lamp glow and vanished into the dark edge of the trees. But the footsteps stayed. That was when the real pressure started. The person never rushed, never tested the handle, never did anything loud enough to justify a simple response. They just moved the sound around my truck, choosing where it appeared next. Left side, then behind, then along the trailer, then silence. Silence long enough for me to imagine them standing right under my door. Then the tapping again, farther back, as if they wanted me to picture their hand on my trailer skin. I watched the mirrors until my eyes hurt. Rain smeared the glass into useless gray, and the street lamp flicker made shadows jump in and out of existence. Every time I thought I caught movement, it turned into water and reflection. I leaned forward, then back, trying to change the angle, trying to find the one clear line that would prove the lot was empty. I found nothing. That nothing felt like a trap. The reefer unit kept humming behind me, steady and familiar, and I hated it for covering small sounds. I turned my head toward the sleeper behind me, even though I knew it was empty. The curtain between the seat and the bunk looked darker than it should, like it was hiding depth. I listened for anything inside, a breath, a shift of fabric. My mind offered images I did not ask for: a hand on the mattress, a body pressed into the corner. I told myself I would know. Then I remembered how many times I have not noticed my own phone vibrating until I looked at it. The tapping shifted along the trailer, then higher, then lower, as if the person was changing position just to change what I imagined. At one point, the step stopped directly behind the cab, in the narrow gap where I could not see without opening the door. I held my breath and waited for a knock. Instead, fingers touched metal again, softer now, closer to my living space, like they had moved from the trailer to the step, or the frame, or the edge of the cab. I flicked my hazards once, on then off. No reaction. I honked once, sharp. The sound died into the trees. The footsteps did not run. After a pause, the tapping resumed. The exact same rhythm. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Patient, almost bored. Thieves rush, drunks stumble. Normal people knock and speak. This person did none of that. They were not asking. They were reminding me that I was inside, and they could stay outside as long as they wanted. The cab felt smaller with every minute. The rain hammered the roof. The street lamp flickered, dimming and brightening like a dying heartbeat. Each dim beat made the lot feel larger, and each bright beat made it feel too exposed. Then the sound moved closer than the trailer. A dull, soft contact near the cab, like fingers on the step under my door, or on the narrow space behind my seat. The footsteps stopped. For a second, there was only rain and the reefer hum. My hand lifted without permission, and I peeled the curtain back a little more, expecting to see the figure somewhere out by the lamp. It was right there, not across the lot, not by the trailer, right at the line of my window, close enough that I did not see it approaching, only the wet outline and the sense of a face at the same height as mine. Most of the body was hidden by the cab angle, as if the person had chosen the one spot my mirrors could not give away. It was motionless. It was looking into the precise crack I had opened, like it had been watching that crack the whole time. No words, no strike, just presence, close enough to turn my truck into a glass box. In that moment, I understood something simple and ugly. My rules reduced risk. They did not remove it. Someone had decided to stand there, and my caution had not mattered. I snapped the curtain shut and lunged for the ignition. The engine caught loud and rough, the cab shuddering as I threw it into gear. The tires slid in mud, then grabbed wet pavement, and I pulled out hard, back toward the highway. My headlights cut through rain and trees, and I forced myself not to look back for long. In the mirror, I saw only the flickering street lamp shrinking behind me. I did not see anyone running. It was like the person never needed to chase. On the highway, the world looked normal again. Lines, signs, distant taillights. That normality felt thin. The tapping rhythm sat in my head under the reefer hum, like my own trailer had learned it. I drove straight to the delivery point and focused on doing everything right, like work could scrub my mind clean. By the time morning thinned the darkness, the yard lights and moving forklifts almost convinced me I was safe again. I parked, got out, and did my usual walk around. Tires, seals, doors, routine, the old comfort. When I reached the front, I saw a wet piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. I thought it was a ticket or a note from security. I pulled it free and turned it over. It was a photograph of me inside the cab that night, taken from outside with a flash. The bright burst had caught my face in the dim interior, eyes shut, mouth slightly open, caught mid-sleep behind the glass and curtains. No message, no name, no reason. Just proof that someone had been close enough to take it, close enough to wait for the moment I looked most helpless. I stood there with morning noise all around me and felt the same cold settle in my stomach. The photo did not explain the motive, and that was the point. It left space for fear to keep working. I folded the picture and put it in my pocket because I did not know what else to do. All day, every time metal shifted or a knock echoed through the yard, my shoulders tightened. That night, when I parked somewhere bright and crowded, I still waited before closing the curtains. I listened to the rain on the roof and the steady hum behind me, and I realized the worst part was not the stop itself. The worst part was that the rhythm now lived in my head, and I could not tell where it would show up next. I have driven car haulers for a long time, long enough that the job can feel like a loop. Same straps, same checklists, same dark roads. That night was supposed to be simple. I had 6 brand new cars on my 2-story trailer. I was running a canyon highway that cuts through empty land for hours. No towns, no streetlights, no cell service. Just my headlights, the rock walls on one side, and the drop into black on the other. I am not the kind of guy who looks for signs. I do not believe in ghosts, and I do not tell myself stories to make a night shift exciting. I keep a podcast playing to stay awake, low enough that I can still hear the engine. I checked my mirrors in my usual rhythm and kept my hands steady, thinking about the delivery lot at sunrise. I was tired in a normal way, the kind of tired that makes you blink a little longer than you should. Then you sit up and promise yourself you will stay sharp. I checked my mirrors again, left, right, then the long look down the trailer. That was when I saw the light. The very last car on the bottom deck had its headlights on, bright beams aimed straight into the road behind me. For a few seconds, I just watched it, waiting for my brain to correct itself. Nothing changed. The light stayed on. My first thought was an electrical short. New cars are full of smart systems now. Automatic lights, sensors, things that wake up when they feel motion. I told myself it was a battery issue, or some stray signal through the harness. I felt annoyed, like the manufacturer had found a new way to make my night harder. I kept driving. Stopping out there is never a good plan. There are stretches where there is barely any shoulder, and the canyon feels like it was built to hide things. I watched the mirror and waited for the headlights to cut out. After a few miles, they did. I breathed out, and the podcast voice started to sound normal again. Then the next car forward turned its headlights on. The timing was too clean. Not a blink, not a random flash. It was on, steady, like someone had decided it should be on. My stomach tightened, but I stayed logical. Maybe the first car had sent a fault through the line. I said it out loud, just to hear my own voice. A few miles later, those headlights shut off, and the next car forward lit up. Then the next. The light was moving up my trailer, step by step, quiet and patient. I turned the podcast down, then off, because suddenly I needed the cab to be silent. The silence did not help. It made every small sound sharper, the engine hum, the tires, the faint rattle of chains. It also made my thoughts louder. I started checking the mirrors too often, not in my normal rhythm anymore. I would look forward, then snap my eyes to the mirror, then forward again, as if I could catch the exact moment the lights jumped. My neck began to ache from the constant movement. Each time the headlights advanced, my pulse answered it, like my body was learning the pattern before my mind could deny it. I grabbed the CB mic and called out, even though I knew nobody was out there. All I got was static. It was the flat kind of static that sounds like distance itself. I tried again anyway, changing channels, tapping the mic, listening for even one crack of another voice. Nothing. The canyon kept my headlights and swallowed everything else. The road felt narrower the longer I went. Rock on one side, emptiness on the other, and darkness ahead that never got brighter. There were no other vehicles, no lights in the distance, no sign that the world still had people in it. The more I looked in the mirror, the more the trailer began to feel like 6 sealed rooms I was dragging through the dark. When the lights reached the cars on the top deck, the fear changed shape. It stopped being about wiring and started being about space. Those cars were supposed to arrive untouched, perfect, clean, safe. The idea that anything could be inside one of them made my skin feel tight. My mirror checks turned into a compulsion I could not stop. I would stare too long, then jerk my eyes forward and correct the wheel, angry at myself for risking the one thing keeping me alive. I tried to build new explanations, and they fell apart as fast as I made them. Someone following me with a remote device, but there were no headlights behind the rig. A factory test mode. But why would it move one car at a time, always forward, always closer to my cab? Every time I accepted one excuse, the lights advanced again and took it away. By the time the pattern reached the front, my hands were sweating on the wheel. I felt trapped by the simplest truth of my job. I could not stop to check, because checking would mean climbing back there alone with my back to the canyon. I could not call for help. The CB gave me nothing but static, and my phone was useless. The only thing I could do was keep moving and hope that movement mattered. Then the top car, right behind the cabin, turned its headlights on. The light came through my rear window and hit the back of my head and shoulders. I looked in the mirror and saw a dark silhouette in the driver's seat of that brand new car. It was not moving. It was just sitting there, facing forward, like a person on a normal drive. My body reacted before my mind did. I locked my doors hard, like I could seal myself twice. My foot hit the gas and the engine rose, louder than it had been all night. I only knew that stopping out here would be a fatal mistake. Morning came the slow way it always does, a thin gray line that makes you realize you survived another night. I drove straight into the delivery lot without stopping anywhere. The lot looked normal. Fences, parked cars, a sleepy worker with a clipboard. I climbed up to inspect the load, forcing my hands to stay steady. The top car behind my cabin was locked from the inside. The windows were fogged from the inside, like someone had been breathing in there for hours. On the steering wheel, there were muddy handprints, clear enough to see finger shapes. No mud anywhere else. No footprints on the trailer, just hands, as if someone had held on all night. I got the door open after too many shaking tries, and the fog rolled out in a damp breath. The seat was empty. There was nobody hiding. There was no obvious sign of a stowaway. The air inside smelled used, not dirty, just warm and human. People asked what was wrong. I tried to explain without sounding crazy. Someone suggested condensation, as if that could explain the headlights walking up the trailer. I called the police anyway. They looked around, asked routine questions, and found nothing that fit. No forced entry, no theft, no broken straps. They told me to get some rest. I still drive. I have to. But the job changed in a way I cannot explain. I cannot listen to podcasts the same way anymore. When voices fill the cab, a part of me wonders what I might miss behind me. When the cab is quiet, a part of me waits for a clean white flare in the mirror. Some nights I check my mirrors and feel relief when there is nothing. Other nights the relief feels wrong because it makes me think of the only thing worse than seeing someone behind you, not seeing them at all.
My name is Julian. I am 26, and I have always been careful in a boring way. Rules calm me down. If there is a sign, I read it. If there is a form, I fill it out. After a long week at my corporate job, I wanted one quiet weekend where nobody needed anything from me. I chose an official national park campground because it felt like the safest kind of alone. It was late autumn, present day. The air was damp and cold, and the road into the park narrowed between wet trees. When I reached the campground, it was empty. No tents, no cars, no lights in the bathroom building. The kiosk at the entrance was still there, with a map and instructions and a metal payment slot. I told myself the emptiness was normal for the off-season. I told myself it was better this way. I checked in anyway. I read the board. I parked inside the lines. I picked a site near the main lane, close to the exit, where staff would pass if they did patrols. Setting up my tent felt like turning noise down in my head. Stakes in, lines tight, zipper working, keys in my pocket. Small, correct actions that make you believe nothing bad can happen. By full dark, the campground felt sealed in. The trees stood still, and the smell of wet leaves sat heavy in the air. I ate something simple and lay down early. I expected a boring night. All week, I had felt like I was being watched. By screens, by calendars, by people who always want an answer. Out here, I wanted the opposite. I wanted to disappear into a place that is official and boring. That is the strange thing about me. I do not look for adventure. I look for a safe kind of isolation, the kind that comes with posted rules and the idea that someone is responsible. I woke to an engine. At first it was far away, a low idle that came and went. Then it stopped completely, like a car had pulled in and chosen to wait. A minute later, I saw a slow sweep of light through the tent fabric, not aimed at me, more like headlights turning behind trees. My first thought was still comforting. Maintenance, a late camper, a ranger. This was a national park, not a random pull-off. I tried to relax into that logic. When the engine sound faded the second time, I almost got up to look outside. Then I did not, because stepping out without a reason felt wrong, like leaving the safe boundary of the tent for no official purpose. I hated that thought, even as I had it. I stayed still and listened. And the longer I listened, the more the quiet felt shaped, as if the empty campground was holding its breath with me. The quiet did not settle. A soft, repetitive tapping I had noticed earlier near the bathroom building, maybe a loose sign or a drip, stopped all at once. The moment it stopped, the air inside my tent felt colder. I lay still and listened for it to start again. It did not. Then I heard footsteps on gravel. They were steady, not rushed, and they came along the lane as if the person belonged there. The sound paused near my sight. I held my breath. A flashlight beam swept across the outside of my tent, slow and careful. It never shone directly into the mesh. It felt like the light was trying to look without being seen. A voice spoke, calm and practiced. "Sir, this is the park ranger. I need you to listen. This is for your safety." My mouth went dry. I sat up slowly. "Hello?" I said. "What is going on?" "There is a severe flash flood warning," he said. "You need to pack immediately. Do not wait. You will follow my truck out of the campground. Do you understand?" Flash flood. In late autumn. My mind tried to argue with it, but the word ranger pulled me toward obedience. It was exactly the kind of authority that usually makes me feel safe. Still, small details scraped at me. The belt jingle sounded too light. The radio crackle sounded thin, like empty noise. And his questions were not about weather. "Are you alone? Is your vehicle working? Does anyone know you are here?" I should have asked for his name. I should have asked to see a badge. Instead, I said, "Yes, I understand, because my body treats uniforms like instructions." "There is no time to check the board," he said. "The roads will be blocked soon. Pack now. When you are in your car, keep your headlights on and follow my truck. Do not stop." I thought about calling the park number on the board. I even reached for my phone. There was no signal, or maybe one weak bar that felt like a joke. The ranger heard the movement and spoke again, still calm. "There is no time for calls. You need to move now." He said it with the same tone my managers use when they are pretending to help. the tone that makes you feel childish for doubting. I stared at the zipper line of my tent and listened to my own breathing. If he was real, obeying was the safe choice. If he was not, obeying could still be the safe choice because staying put could be worse. My mind went in circles, and each circle ended at the same place. Pack, follow, do what you are told. The cold pressed harder. The tent fabric felt damp against my knuckles, and the walls seemed to lean inward with the weight of the night. The campground was too quiet, like the forest had decided to listen. I turned on my small light and started stuffing things into a bag, fast and clumsy. I kept thanking him, because that is what I do when I feel trapped. He did not answer. He only repeated one word, calm as a clock. Hurry. When I unzipped the tent and stepped out, the air felt sharp. The ranger stood a few meters away, still and patient, flashlight angled down. In the darkness, the uniform looked almost right. I could not see his face clearly, only the shape of his head and the calm set of his body. He did not help. He only watched, as if watching was the job. I carried my bag to my car and climbed into the driver's seat. My hands shook as I turned the key. The engine started, and the familiar sound almost soothed me. Then my headlights came on, and the white light flooded the sight. In that light, the uniform fell apart. The name tag on his chest was upside down. Not crooked, upside down, like someone had copied the idea of a ranger without understanding it. My eyes dropped to his belt. The radio was plastic and glossy, a cheap toy. It hung there, pretending to be a tool. The man did not move. He did not rush me. He did not raise his voice. He just stood in my headlights with a small, calm mouth, like he had been waiting for me to notice, like it did not matter when I did. In that moment, the trap became simple. The uniform was not there to protect me. It was there to guide me. It was meant for someone like me, someone who follows instructions first and thinks later. I stopped packing. I locked my doors. The click sounded loud. I put the car in gear and drove. I expected him to run, to shout, to step into the lane. He did none of it. In the mirror, I saw him take one slow step forward and stop again. There were no headlights behind me, no truck, no chase. The road stayed dark, and that made my skin crawl. If he did not need to follow, then his plan was never about speed. It was about trust. I drove until I found lights. A gas station with a cashier behind glass and a few cars that made the world feel real. Only then did I call. The police listened. They looked at the campground later in daylight. In daylight, it was wet leaves, gray sky, empty sights. No storm, no flood, no ranger truck. The next day, an official called me back. His tone was polite and flat. He told me there is no night shift in that park, not in the off-season. No ranger patrol at 2 a.m., no flash flood warning issued, no staff truck dispatched. He could not give me a reason for the man, only the fact that the system I trusted had not been there at all. I went home safe, and I told myself I should feel grateful. What I felt was smaller and worse, a kind of embarrassment, like I had almost handed myself over because a stranger wore the right shape. Now I notice uniforms everywhere. A security guard in my office lobby, a worker in a reflective jacket near the road, a calm voice that says, "This is for your safety," I listen for the cheap sounds, for the wrong details, for the way authority can be used like a leash. Sometimes I wake up and check the time without thinking. If I see 2 a.m., my chest tightens before I can stop it. Not because I believe he is outside my window, because I remember how quietly he stood in the dark and how close I came to following. My name is Victor, and I am 35. When I left my car by the old service road that evening, all I wanted was one full night of sleep. I work in an ER, and after years of alarms, bright lights, and people asking me to choose fast and choose right, tiredness stopped feeling normal. It felt deeper than that, like something in me had been used too hard for too long. I did not come to the hill for adventure. I came because I wanted one place where nobody could reach me and nothing would ask anything from me. There were no trails up there, no marked camps, and no reason for another person to walk that far unless they were looking for the same silence. That was exactly why I kept climbing. Hours passed between the car and the flat patch of ground I finally chose, and by then the light had gone soft and thin. The hill felt empty in a clean way, untouched and almost careless. I pitched the tent, crawled inside, and listened to the wind move over the grass. The fabric around me was thin, but it gave the night a shape, and for the first time in months, I felt close to letting go. The first sound came after dark, one small crunch beyond the tent, as if a shoe had pressed down carefully on dry ground and then stopped. I opened my eyes and listened, but nothing followed. The hill had its own small noises, wind in the grass, a little movement in the tent fabric, my gear settling into place, and I told myself it belonged to one of those. I had spent too many nights at work hearing patterns in monitors and footsteps in hallways, and I knew what exhaustion could do. When you stay alert for too long, your mind starts building meaning where there is none. Then I heard another crunch, placed too neatly in the silence to feel natural. This time I stayed still. There was no path outside, no nearby campsite, no good reason for anyone to be up there after dark. I almost unzipped the tent and looked out, but the idea felt foolish. I did not want to shine a light into empty darkness and confirm that I was letting my nerves take over. I told myself it was grass giving under the wind, or a small animal crossing the slope, or my brain refusing to leave the hospital behind. That should have settled me. Instead, once the thought entered my mind that the sound might be human, the whole hill changed. The same distance that had felt peaceful now made every careful noise feel wrong, and what disturbed me most was the sense that something out there had paused, as if it were waiting for me to decide what I had heard. I do not know how much time passed after that. I only know I stopped trying to sleep in any honest way. I kept my eyes shut, but I was listening with the hard attention I usually save for a room where something is about to go wrong. The hill stayed quiet long enough for me to feel embarrassed by my own tension, and then a slow step pressed into the ground near the tent wall. It was close enough that the fabric beside me stopped feeling like shelter and started feeling like a reminder of how little separated me from whatever stood outside. I held my breath and waited for a second step, but none came. That was worse. I told myself the sound had to be distorted by the hill, that distance was harder to judge at night, that the tired mind reaches for the worst shape first. Still, the space beyond the fabric no longer felt empty. A few minutes later, there was a soft drag, so light I almost missed it. It sounded like fingertips brushing the outer fly, or cloth moving against cloth. The touch was not forceful. It was gentle enough to seem careful. That was what made it feel deliberate. I almost said hello, but the words stayed in my throat because I was suddenly certain I did not want an answer. The quiet that followed had weight. I could not see anything. I could not measure distance. I could not tell whether I was being watched, studied, or simply kept awake on purpose. I kept one hand near the zipper of my sleeping bag and hated the fact that it was the only action available to me. The next sound was a small shift of weight in the grass, close, patient, and so controlled that I understood with a cold clarity that whatever was outside was not lost. A lost hiker would call out. An animal would scratch, sniff, move on. This presence did none of that. It stayed just beyond the tent in a way that felt almost respectful, and that false respect made it harder to bear. It was as if the boundary of the tent mattered only because crossing it was a choice being postponed. I saw nothing, yet I could feel my body reacting as if I were looking straight at a face. My mouth had gone dry. The sleeping bag felt too narrow around my legs. Every breath seemed loud enough to tell the person outside exactly where I was. Then the ground eased again under one careful step, then another, not circling the tent, not leaving, just changing position. I imagined someone standing there with all the time in the world, listening to me listen back. The isolation I had wanted folded in on itself. I was not hidden from the world. I was hidden with something I could not see. By then, I was no longer waiting to sleep. I was waiting for the next quiet sign that the person outside had decided not to go away. Once, I thought I heard breathing, but I could not trust it. Once, I thought I heard the slightest press near the door, and then nothing followed. Each time the hill fell still, I hoped it was over. Each time the stillness held too long, I understood that this was part of it. Whoever was outside was not rushing toward anything. They were letting the waiting do the work. At some point, I must have slipped into a thin, broken sleep because I woke all at once and knew immediately that something was wrong. The darkness inside the tent was complete. For a second, I did not move, and then I heard it. The zipper on the outer door was being pulled down very slowly, one tooth at a time, with such steady control that the sound seemed to pass through my body instead of through the air. I froze inside the sleeping bag so hard that my muscles hurt. I could not even lift my head. All I could do was listen as the opening widened inch by inch. It stopped halfway. I waited for hands, for a face, for the tent to collapse, for anything that would at least give the moment a clear shape. Nothing came. There was only the half-opened door, the cold air slipping in, and the sound of heavy breathing just outside the gap. Close, human, unhurried. Whoever stood there had opened the tent enough to prove they could come in, and then chosen not to. I lay there without moving, holding my breath until my chest burned, knowing with absolute certainty that someone was standing a few feet away in the dark and looking in. The worst part was how long it lasted. Because after the zipper stopped, nothing changed except the sound of that breathing. It came in and out of the opening with a slow weight that made the tent feel occupied, even though the person never stepped inside. I kept waiting for a voice, a hand, some sudden rush that would turn the fear into an event I could understand. But the minutes passed, and the only thing happening was that someone remained there, close enough to enter, and chose instead to stand in silence. I had spent years around pain, blood, panic, and people on the edge of death. None of that prepared me for being left still and conscious inside my own fear. I do not know what they were looking at, or whether they could see me clearly, or whether the whole point was simply to let me know that the barrier between us was thin and temporary. Mercy should have felt like relief, but this did not feel like mercy. It felt like permission being withheld. I kept imagining a face in the darkness beyond the opening, taking in the shape of the tent and the proof that I could do nothing but wait. Then, the zipper began to move upward. It rose one tooth at a time, just as slowly as it had come down, until the door was closed. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps fading across the hill. I stayed where I was until the sky began to pale, afraid that any movement would call the person back. When morning finally came, the hill looked empty again. That made it worse. There was no answer for why someone had climbed to a place with no trail, opened my tent halfway, breathed into the dark, and left me untouched. I packed with shaking hands and walked back to the car, but the question stayed with me all the way down. Why did he come? What did he see when he looked in? And why did he decide that leaving me alive with the memory was enough? My name is Mark. I am 32, and I make my living with a camera in my hands. Not the kind that makes you famous, the kind that makes you patient. When I am looking through a lens, I feel calm. I can turn a wild place into a frame, and the frame feels like control. If I am honest, I can get arrogant behind the lens. That is why I went into the Black Forest alone. It was late in the season, wet enough that everything smelled like soil, and quiet enough that you could hear your own breath. I was there for a rare owl that shows up for a few nights and then disappears again. I had been chasing it for weeks. I wanted a clean photo and a small, private victory. Then I wanted to be left alone. I set up my tent in a flat spot between tall trees. The fabric was old but reliable. Inside, I lined up my gear the way I always do. Phone, power bank, headlamp, spare batteries, GPS. Then the trail camera. That was my comfort item. Small, black, practical. I mounted it on a tree at the edge of a narrow corridor where animals usually pass. I checked the angle, the date, the time, infrared mode, sensitivity. The screen flashed, then went dark. It felt like I had posted a guard. When I crawled into the tent, I was tired in an ordinary way. My shoulders ached, my fingers were stiff, and my socks were still slightly damp. That annoyed me more than it should have. I took my boots off at the entrance because I hate dirt in the tent. I placed them beside the door flap where I could reach them without thinking. I zipped up, turned off the headlamp, and listened. At first, it was just night. A drip from leaves, a distant branch shifting, a soft rush of wind. Then I heard the trail camera click. Tiny, far away, but clear. I smiled in the dark. An animal, I thought. Maybe even the owl. The click came again, then again. Not constant, but close enough together that it stopped feeling random. I held still and waited for the forest to settle, but it did not. The night got flatter, like someone had pressed a hand against it. I told myself the sensor was being fooled by moisture. Fog can move like a body in infrared. Wind can twitch a branch. I reminded myself that I came out here to record movement, and movement was what I was getting. Still, the timing bothered me. I reached for my phone to check the time and saw the screen glow without me touching it. Just a soft light, then darkness. I stared at it, then at my hands. I was not moving. I blamed a bad setting and tried to let it go. I told myself the camera would catch whatever it was. The trail camera went quiet for a long stretch. That silence started to feel worse than the clicking. If it was wind, it should keep triggering. If it was an animal, it should pass and trigger again. But it stopped, and the stop felt deliberate. I listened for the owl call I wanted so badly, but the night stayed blank. The cold deepened suddenly. It did not creep in. It arrived, as if a door had opened in the forest. My skin prickled. The inside of the tent felt close, and my breath left a thin fog against the fabric. I listened harder and noticed something I did not like. When I moved inside the tent, the outside sounds seemed to pause. When I froze, they returned. I tested it again, a hand shift, then stillness. Each time, the quiet snapped into place like a switch. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself I was tired, but I could not unfeel it. I opened the zipper just a little and let damp air slide in. Then I clicked my headlamp on and angled it through the gap. Trees, wet leaves, black space between trunks. No eyes, no clear shape. But the shadows looked thicker than they should, and my light did not seem to reach as far as it had earlier. For a moment I thought I saw a darker vertical line between two trunks, like a person standing still. But when I held the beam steady, it became just another patch of forest. And yet the darkness did not feel empty. It felt occupied, like a room where someone stands just outside the doorway and refuses to step in. I shut the zipper again. I wanted to check the trail camera to see what had triggered it, to prove I was being stupid. I reached down for my boots. My fingers found the right boot. The left boot was there too, but not exactly where I remembered it. Only a small shift, the kind you can blame on nothing. I stared at it anyway, trying to force my mind to replay the moment I placed it. I could not. I sat in the dark with my breathing slow, waiting for a sound that would explain everything. Nothing came. No step in wet soil, no branch snap, just the soft pressure of the forest around me. At one point, the trail camera clicked once, very softly, then went quiet again. That single click felt like a decision. At some point I slept, but it was light sleep. When I woke, the tent was gray with early morning. Birds were calling like nothing had happened. For a few seconds, I felt relief. Then I reached for my boots. My hand touched one boot, then empty space. I froze and searched again, slower. The right boot was there, the left boot was not. Gone. Not kicked away, not hidden under my pack. Gone as if it had been lifted and carried out with intent. I sat still for a long time. I did not run outside. I did not shout. I just listened. Because the only thing worse than being alone is knowing you are not alone and having no idea where the other person is. The thought of my trail camera did not comfort me anymore. It made me feel exposed. I packed fast with one shoe and one cold sock. The forest looked innocent, and that made me angry. I walked straight to the tree where I had mounted the trail camera. The latch snapped when I opened it, sharp in the quiet morning. I pulled the card and slid it into my phone. The first clips were nothing. Leaves moving, shadows, a fox at a distance. Then I found the file with the timestamp, 3 a.m. I tapped it and held my breath. The image was steady. Infrared made the world look pale and flat. And there he was, a man standing right outside my tent, close enough that the faint glow from the fabric outlined his shoulders. His face stayed mostly hidden in shadow, but I could still see a mouth. He was smiling, not wide, small and calm like he had practiced it. He was looking directly at the camera, like he knew exactly where it was, like he wanted me to find this later, when it was too late to change anything. Then I saw what he was holding, my left hiking boot. He held it by the heel, casual, almost gentle, as if it belonged to him. I watched the clip again. The man did not do much. He did not rush. He just stood there and smiled into my false safety. The file ended without showing him leave. It simply cut back to empty forest. I left after that. I found signal and called the police. I tried to keep my voice calm because panic makes you sound less believable. I showed them the video and told them what I could. A person outside my tent at 3 a.m. holding my boot. They asked questions I could not answer. Who was he? Why was he there? Did he do anything else? I had no proof, only the proof that he had been at my door and that I had slept anyway. They took my statement and wrote it down like it belonged in a small file. In daylight, the place looked harmless, and that made it harder to explain. No broken tent, no injury, no clear threat. Just a man who had stood close enough to touch my life, then vanished back into trees. Later, at home, I replayed the clip on a bigger screen. It did not get clearer. It only got worse. The smile stayed calm. The shadows stayed thick. The boot stayed in his hand like a message. I used to think a camera was a shield. Now I know it can be an invitation. I still use trail cameras, but I do not feel safe when they click anymore. I feel seen. I do not camp alone now. I keep my light closer. I listen to silence like it is a sound. The worst part is not that he stole my boot. The worst part is how easy it was and how patient he seemed. Sometimes I wake up before dawn and check the time without meaning to. When I see 3 o'clock, I do not feel sudden panic. I feel a dull certainty that the line between safe and not safe is thinner than fabric, and it makes no sound when it moves.
At the end of one of the city's oldest streets, there is a stone building that no one walks past in a hurry. At night, weak yellow lights glow from its windows, the only sign that something inside is still awake. Those lights tell you that someone is still on duty. I remember the first day I stood in front of its door. The massive dark oak door did not feel like an entrance. It felt like a boundary. When you reach for the knocker, you do not only feel the cold metal in your hand, you feel the weight of the past. And when the door opens and you step inside, the world changes. The smell comes first. The dry, slightly sweet scent of old book pages mixes with the heavy warmth of aged wood. There is also something else, something faint and difficult to name, as if something once happened here and left behind a trace that can no longer be seen, but can still be felt. Almost the entire building is made of wood. The stairs, the shelves, the railings, they should creak with every step. But under my feet, they never make a sound. I have worked the night shift here for 10 years. During the day, the building is crowded. At night, it shows its true face. The shelves seem taller, the ceiling darker, and the shadows deeper. I walk between the shelves, find books that were placed in the wrong spot, and return them to where they belong. There is no rush in this job. Books do not like hurry. Sometimes I whisper to them, "Go back to your place," I say softly. And every time I find the right empty space waiting. I know the rhythm of this building. I know which window trembles at which hour and which lamp flickers at which minute. Still, there are moments when I feel that not everything here is under my control. I felt this more clearly the night I first saw her. When I entered the reading hall, she was sitting at the table in the far corner. Thick books were stacked in front of her. The light fell directly on her table, leaving the rest of the hall in shadow. "These books are very heavy," I said quietly. You'll need a long night to finish them." She looked up and smiled. "Maybe weeks," she said, "but time passes faster here." Her name was Daphne. She studied at the city university, even though the campus was far from this place. "Why don't you go to the modern library there?" I asked her one night. "It's brighter, warmer." Daphne shook her head slowly. "It's too noisy there," she said. "This place feels like it protects me. The light is always adjusted perfectly. My table is always clean. When I step behind that door, I feel safe." Then she looked directly into my eyes and added, "I am never alone here." That sentence stayed with me. The nights continued like this. Daphne always chose the same table. Sometimes she wrote for hours. Sometimes she simply stared at the shelves, as if she were listening to something hidden inside the darkness. One night, I finally asked, "Do you see something?" "No," she answered softly. "It's just, sometimes the silence changes." That night, the hall felt warmer than usual. Maybe the ventilation was not working, or maybe I only imagined it. Everything changed with the vibration of a phone. Daphne's phone buzzed on the table. She looked at the screen, and her face suddenly turned pale. "Hello?" she said. There was a long pause. Then she whispered, "I'm coming. Right away." She quickly gathered her books and took her bag. For a brief moment, she looked at me, as if she wanted to say something, but no words came. Then she left. The door closed behind her, and the hall returned to silence. But something remained on the table, a small diary with a dark blue cover. At first, I did not touch it. Then, with a feeling I could not explain, I reached for it and opened it. "I saw him again," it said. "He walks between the shelves. There are no footsteps, but the silence changes." I swallowed and turned the page. "The light becomes more yellow where he stands. He has no shadow." I slowly lifted my head and looked toward the darker corner of the hall. On the next page, she wrote, "My father died before I was born. My mother says he was very brave. Everyone says that, but I see him here." My chest tightened. I continued reading. "Tonight I spoke to him. I asked his name. I heard him say, 'Adam.' He is my father, just like in the photographs, young, calm, and very handsome. But not as alive as in the pictures. His face is a little more pale, as if the light does not fully touch him. He smiles, but the smile does not reach his eyes. When he looks at me, he feels very close and impossibly far at the same time." My fingers began to tremble. The next lines were written more quickly, almost uneven. "Sometimes I see him near the door, as if he wants to go outside, but he shouldn't." Below that, she wrote the reason. "When my mother tells the story, she always says the same thing." That night, everyone got out, but my father went back inside, upstairs, for the books. Then the building caught fire. The moment I read those words, memory returned like heat against my skin. Heat, smoke, the burning in my throat, the sound of wood cracking, and me running upstairs instead of toward the door. For a brief second, a heavy smell filled the hall. The smell I had known for years, but never allowed myself to name. Burned wood. I had not made it out that night. Or maybe I had never truly tried. I looked at the massive oak door, standing silently in the darkness. Daphne was right. I was not guarding this place. I had stayed here. And if one day I open that door, maybe the building will remember what was left unfinished. Maybe the flames never truly went out. A soft cracking sound came from somewhere between the shelves. For the first time in 10 years, the wood creaked under my feet. And in the deep silence of the library, I heard it clearly. The shift is not over. I start my shifts the same way every night. I unlock the door, flip the sign, and listen to the neon outside buzz without pause. The diner sits alone on a desert highway, miles from anything that feels awake. Inside, the lights are warm but tired, and the air smells like old coffee. I wipe the counter, restock creamers, and let the clock crawl. I am the night waitress, and I am not the jumpy type. I have dealt with drunks, storms, and people who try to test a woman working alone. Fear wastes time. Routine saves it. I know every sound in this building, and I like clear lines and clear rules. After 2 in the morning, the customers are not always human. I say that like I am talking about truckers and tourists, because for me, it is just the late crowd. Some look almost normal until you notice one wrong detail, a shadow that bends the wrong way, hands that never warm up around the mug. They come in, they order, they pay, they leave. The diner stays neutral. That is the deal. The rules keep it neutral. No one comes behind the counter unless I invite them. No one gets served unless they ask. No one stays without paying. No one says my full name. These rules are not written down, but everybody who matters knows them, and I enforce them like any other policy. That night I was tired in a way I did not want to admit. My feet hurt, my shoulders were tight, and my head kept circling a small argument I had earlier with someone I cared about. It ended with silence, and silence is heavy when you work alone. I told myself I would deal with it after sunrise. The door chime rang once, sharp and clean. I looked up and saw an empty doorway. Just highway, just desert, just the neon glow bleeding into the glass. I waited, then told myself the wind hit the frame. The neon buzz outside shifted pitch for a second, like a note played wrong, then settled. I kept wiping the counter and refused to give it meaning. A regular after-hours customer came in a few minutes later, one of the polite ones. It stepped inside, paused, and stared at the doorway like it was listening. Then it walked to the counter and placed payment down before I rang anything up. It leaned closer and spoke in a voice so calm it tightened my stomach. "If it does not order, do not offer." Then it left, quick and quiet, and the bell did not ring on the way out. I told myself it was being dramatic. Some of them are. I poured coffee for myself and watched the minutes fall. When the chime rang again, someone was there. It walked in slowly, like it had nowhere else to be. At first, it looked like a normal person, tall, plain clothes, nothing that screamed danger. Then I noticed it did not blink. It stopped just inside the doorway and stood completely still. I kept my voice flat and professional. "Seat yourself if you are dining." No response. I waited, then tried again. Slower. Still nothing. It did not scan the room. It did not look at the menu. It was refusing the basic shape of a customer. The diner felt tighter with it there. I kept moving, because stopping would mean thinking. I wiped a clean spot that was already clean. I watched it in reflections. The pie case glass, the dark screen of the jukebox. When I looked straight at it, it stayed still. When I looked away, the pressure in the room shifted, like a soft step on carpet that makes no sound. One other customer came in, poured their own money onto the counter, and left before finishing their drink. They never do that. They did not look at the doorway, and they did not look at me. They acted like pretending was safer than speaking. I checked my phone behind the counter. Full signal, no connection. I tried again, same result. I walked to the back door and checked the lock. It was locked, but the chain hung at a slightly different angle than I remembered. I stared at it until my eyes hurt, then went back out front and told myself I was tired. That was all. The thing was still near the doorway, and yet it felt closer, not in distance, in ownership. The warning repeated in my head. If it does not order, do not offer. Offering is a kind of opening. I did not ask what it wanted. I stayed in my rules. I focused on the oldest rule I know, the one that makes this place a sanctuary. The diner can hold anything as long as it stays a transaction. If I could force it into the role of a customer, even for a moment, the boundary would notice it, and the rules would snap back into place. I took a clean mug and set it on the customer side, right where I always set an order. I poured black coffee, steady and careful. I slid it forward and said, "Coffee, $2. Then I turned and rang it up. The keys clicked loud in the tight air. I opened the drawer and shut it hard, like a gavel. For a few seconds, nothing changed. Then the neon buzz outside rose in pitch, and the overhead light above the doorway flickered. The thing moved without walking. One moment it was at the threshold. The next it was closer to the counter, in the space between booths. It was still, but now I could see what it was watching. Not me. The small gate behind the counter. The opening only I use. My mouth went dry. I looked down at the gate and saw a faint smear on the inside edge, like someone had brushed it from the wrong side. The latch was still closed. Nobody should have been able to touch it. The realization was simple and awful. It was not waiting to come in. It had already found a way into the boundary, into my side of the line, and it had done it quietly. I did not run. Running would be permission in its own way. I kept my hands on the counter and kept my voice calm. Pay or leave. I flipped the sign to closed, even though there was nobody out there to read it. The diner reads it. I pointed at the mug. $2. It did not speak. It did not blink. It stood close enough that the air felt like a freezer. I felt the urge to offer a refill, to act polite, and I did not. I held the line with the only tools I had, rules and routine. I took $2 from my own tips and set them beside the mug. I made the transaction complete, even if I was paying myself. Then I said the closing words I rarely say out loud. Paid and done. I slammed the register drawer again, and the sound cut through the diner like a door locking. The building reacted. The fan squeaked once. The neon buzz steadied. The air near the counter tightened, not around me, but around the thing. It resisted, silent and stubborn, and then it shifted backward like a tide being pulled. The bell above the door rang once on its own, sharp and final. The door opened outward by itself, and the dark outside seemed to take what did not belong. The door shut. The chime did not ring. The diner kept humming like nothing happened. I stood there until my legs stopped shaking, and only then did I breathe like a normal person. When my phone finally connected, I called the county line and said there had been a trespasser. I did not say more because there was nothing I could prove. By sunrise, the world looked normal again, which almost felt worse. One booth felt colder than the others, like it kept a memory. I kept catching my reflection in the pie case and thinking it lagged by half a second. I checked the back door chain again, then again, and told myself to stop. Then the door chime rang the normal way. An ordinary truck driver walked in, shoulders slumped, eyes red, face human in the plainest sense. "Morning. Coffee?" he asked. I poured it and set it down like I always do. He paid, thanked me, and drank like it mattered. I smiled and worked like nothing happened, because that is what keeps a place like this alive. Still, when the bell above the door went quiet, I did not trust the quiet, and when the neon outside buzzed, I listened for the moment it might change pitch again. I took the morgue shift because it was the quietest corner of the hospital, and I needed quiet more than I needed sleep. Finals were close, and I had convinced myself that a silent night could save me. Down on the second sub-basement level, there were no families, no crowded hallways, no small talk. Just locked doors, long sterile corridors, and fluorescent lights that hummed like they were part of the air. The first hour was routine. I signed in, checked the clipboard, and walked through the echoing hallway to the intake room. My shoes sounded too loud on the polished floor. The air smelled like disinfectant and cold metal. I made coffee from the vending machine, bitter and thin, and drank it anyway. Then I set my textbooks on the small desk near the wall, opened my notes, and told myself this was simple. Study, stay awake, go home. I was already jittery when midnight came. I had been drinking coffee since late afternoon, and it did not make me calm. It made me sharp in the wrong way. My thoughts jumped. My knee bounced under the desk without permission. Still, the morgue felt safe in a plain, boring sense. Bodies do not move. That is the one promise you expect down here. The elevator bell sounded once. A moment later, the doors opened, and two orderlies pushed a stretcher into the hall. The sheet over the body was clean and flat. One of the orderlies looked exhausted, like he had no emotions left for the night. He spoke fast, like he wanted to leave the words behind. John Doe, no identification, presumed dead on arrival, brought in just before midnight. I did the intake steps on autopilot. I checked the paperwork, attached the tag, and guided the stretcher into the room. The stainless table was cold under my palms. I slid the body over, pulled the sheet back into place, and wrote the entry in the log. It was work, not drama. When I finished, I washed my hands, dried them, and returned to my desk. For a while it worked. I read, underlined, and copied key lines onto flashcards. The lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere far above me, a cart rolled by and then faded. I looked up once and saw the covered body on the table. It was exactly where I left it. I felt a small wave of relief and went back to studying. The first strange moment was almost nothing. I glanced over again, and I thought the right hand under the sheet was closer to the edge of the table than before. A few millimeters, maybe less. The kind of difference that could come from memory, not reality. I stared at it until my eyes felt dry, then looked away, then looked back. It seemed normal again. I told myself I was tired, and my brain was playing games. 10 minutes later, I blinked during a long sentence, and when my eyes opened, the angle of the head under the sheet looked different. Not a lift, not a turn you could point at, just a subtle shift, like weight settling. My stomach tightened. Then I gave myself a quiet, embarrassed laugh, like I had caught myself acting childish. I tried to be logical. Bodies settle, muscles relax. The table could have vibrated when the elevator closed. I took a slow breath, drank coffee, and forced my eyes back onto the page. But the changes kept returning, and they started to feel timed. It happened when I turned my back to write something down, or when I blinked after staring too long. Every time I looked again, something was slightly different. A new crease in the sheet, a shoulder line that looked sharper, a finger shape that seemed to have curled. It was never enough to prove anything, and that kept me trapped inside my own arguments. I began doing small checks without admitting why. I placed a pen on the floor near the table leg as a reference point. I angled my chair so the table sat in the edge of my vision. I took a photo on my phone, then another, then told myself to stop. The pictures looked almost identical, and that almost felt like an insult. If it was real, it was too subtle for the camera. If it was in my head, it was too consistent to ignore. The fluorescent lights flickered once, just a brief dip in brightness. It made me blink hard. When I looked back, the sheet had a fresh crease near the chest, as if something beneath it had expanded and then settled. I held my breath and waited for another shift. Nothing happened. The room stayed quiet, and my heartbeat sounded too loud in my ears. I told myself the simplest explanation: sleep deprivation, caffeine, stress. I told myself I had chosen this shift to study, and now I was wasting it on fear. Still, my attention kept sliding back to the table like it was being pulled. I found myself holding my eyes open too long, trying to win by refusing to blink. Tears gathered, my vision blurred. I pressed my nails into my palm to stay grounded and counted slow breaths. Then I noticed what finally made it worse. The posture was not random. It was orienting. The head under the sheet had turned, little by little, toward where I sat. The hand had shifted, little by little, toward the side closest to my desk. The thought was ridiculous, but it fit the pattern too well. It felt like a game where the only move it needed was patience, and the only weakness it needed was my blinking. I stood up and walked to the table. My legs felt stiff. Up close, everything looked ordinary. Clean sheet, still outline, human shape. I checked the tag again, as if the name could change. John Doe. No story, no context, no reason for my fear. I leaned in and listened. Silence. I held my hand near the chest without touching, waiting to feel any hint of air. Nothing. For a moment, a sharp relief cut through me, and I almost believed I had imagined the whole night. Then my eyes burned and I blinked. When my eyes opened, the chest rose. A deep inhale, slow and full, like someone surfacing from underwater. The sheet lifted with it. Then the eyes opened under the edge of the fabric, wet and focused, and I felt the room shrink around me. In my head, the explanation tried to arrive. A rare neurological condition, catalepsy. A person who looked dead but was not. A problem that demanded help, not panic. But my fear was already too far ahead of my reasoning. All I could think was that I had been watching a person for hours, and the person had been watching me back in tiny increments. A sound broke out of me, and then I was screaming. I stumbled away from the table, hit the edge of my desk, and fumbled my phone. I ran out of the room into the corridor toward the elevator, my footsteps slapping the floor and echoing like they belonged to someone else. I did not stop to call properly. I did not stop to explain. I just fled the basement level like it was closing in. Later, people told me different versions. One nurse said there had been no John Doe brought down that night. Another said there was, and that the person woke up and staff handled it. Someone else said I was found in the hallway shaking, repeating the same sentence again and again. I asked about security footage. Then I changed my mind. Then I asked again. In the end, I did not watch it. Even now, I cannot tell you what was true. I can only tell you what my body remembers. The fluorescent hum felt like pressure. Blinking felt like risk. A few millimeters felt like a mile. I finished my exams, but I never took another quiet shift down there. Some nights, when my eyes get dry from reading, I catch myself holding them open too long, and I feel that old fear rise, calm on the surface, and endless underneath. That was the night my mind stopped feeling like a safe place. I took the night watch job at the Natural History Museum because I wanted distance from people and from myself. The building sits outside the city, old stone and Gothic arches behind wet trees and an empty parking lot. Fog hangs around it like a habit. Rain never fully stops. It taps the roof until you forget it. Then it hits harder and reminds you that you are alone. My work is dull on purpose. I check locks, I walk the same routes, I log temperatures and humidity. I watch camera feeds that show empty halls. I like details because details do not ask questions. They do not ask about the mistake I made years ago, the one I keep sealed behind calm routines and quiet nights. Most shifts feel like a controlled box. Glass cases, labeled fossils, silent dioramas, the smell of dust and disinfectant. I eat a cold sandwich at the security desk, drink bitter coffee, straighten crooked signs, then patrol again. It is a life that fits my need to stay unseen. That night, near the end of my first basement patrol, I found something that did not fit. In the lowest storage level, where the light is weak and the air is damp, a small cassette player sat on a shelf behind folded cloth and old crates. It was scuffed plastic, scratched buttons, dust in the speaker. No tag, no inventory sticker, no record. Missing records bother me more than they should. The museum is built on numbers. Every object has a label. Every box has a list. I carried the cassette player upstairs and checked the inventory binder and the digital catalog. Nothing. I told myself it was an old staff device left behind. I set it on the corner of my desk beside the logbook and went back to work. Just after midnight, I heard a click, then a soft whir like tiny wheels turning. The cassette player was playing. I stared at it, annoyed first, then uneasy. Old electronics fail. Buttons stick. Buildings surge. I reached for it, and a whisper came through the speaker. It was a voice, low and close, like someone speaking with their lips near a microphone. At first the words were blurred under the rain and the vent hum. Then I caught a clear line. "Do you know what you are guarding?" My fingers hovered above the stop button. I told myself it was a prank tape. Still, I listened. The whisper spoke about the museum, as if it knew the building from inside. It mentioned the mineral hall, not the display, but the hand that switched labels after a donation. It spoke of old staff photos upstairs, and it said things those faces would never want repeated. I pressed stop. The tape kept playing. I pulled the batteries out. The whisper continued, softer, but still there. I locked the cassette player in a desk drawer and turned the key. For a few minutes, there was only rain. Then, while I wrote a humidity reading, the whisper returned through the wood, as if my attention had opened a door. The next hour became a careful game. When I focused on my work, the tape started. When I tried to ignore it, the words sharpened. The fluorescent lights flickered once, just enough to force a blink. When my eyes opened, the whisper felt closer, like it had stepped forward without moving. I told myself the sound was stress inside my head. I unlocked the drawer and held the cassette player because I needed something solid. The plastic was real in my hands. The play button was pressed in again. I took it with me on patrol, thinking I could control where I heard it. I walked past the dinosaur hall, past the taxidermy cases, past a meteorite display. The whisper changed as I moved. Near the animals, it spoke about the hands that prepared them, the small cruelties hidden under careful stitching. Near the meteorite, it spoke about a lab accident and a report rewritten, about a man who never came back upstairs. It was never loud. It never threatened me. That was the violation. It made the museum feel awake, and it made my safe routine feel watched. By 2 a.m, silence stopped feeling neutral. Silence felt like someone standing just behind you, not touching you, only waiting for you to turn. I tried one last test. I left the cassette player at the desk and walked down the hall, around a corner, out of sight. I counted to 30 and came back. It was playing. I had not heard the click from the corridor. It started without needing sound, as if it only needed my absence. Then the whisper shifted. It stopped naming other people. It began describing me. "It is always the same route," it said. "You check the west door twice. You do not watch the camera frame with the broken timestamp. You prefer numbers because they do not look back." My throat went dry. No coworker knew those habits. The voice continued, calm and intimate. "You came here to avoid faces. You came here because you think stone walls can hold a secret." I told myself it was guessing, building a profile. Then it said my first name, softly, like it belonged in the air. My shoulders tightened, as if someone had stepped close. I went upstairs to the portrait corridor because the tape kept mentioning photographs. The hallway was narrow and lined with framed black and white images from decades past. Outside the tall windows, fog pressed against the glass, and rain drew thin lines down the panes. The building smelled of wet stone. As I walked, the whispers matched the frames. A curator in one photo, a theft covered as a clerical error, a lab assistant in another, a bruise no one reported, a director in the center, money missing, and a convenient alarm that erased records. Each secret landed like a soft tap, not a strike. I stopped at a group photo taken beside a new display case draped in cloth. The whisper slowed, as if it enjoyed the pause. "And you," it said. The corridor felt smaller. My flashlight beam trembled on the glass. The voice spoke my full name, clear and complete. No one had said it in this building before. Then it told my secret. It did not build suspense. It simply stated what I did the moment I chose silence, the person I let down by doing nothing. It described the room where it happened, the rain outside, the way my hands shook afterward, details I had never spoken, details I had never written. In that moment, I understood the passive threat. It was not a stranger in the dark. It was the museum itself, listening, collecting, waiting for the right person to arrive. The building was not only holding artifacts, it was holding confessions. I could have smashed the cassette player against the stone floor. I could have thrown it into the rain. I did neither. I stood there and listened to my own history in a calm voice that did not judge me, only named me. I returned to the security desk slowly. I locked the doors again, even though they were already locked. I lowered the lights. Rain kept falling, Fog kept pressing at the windows. I set the cassette player in front of me like an artifact placed for inspection, and I sat down. My hands were steady now, not because I felt safe, but because something had settled. The tape whispered again, softer, almost kind, and returned to fossils and stones and faces behind glass. I listened without interrupting. Outside, the rain filled the silence. Inside, the museum spoke in a voice that never raised itself. Before the next hour ended, I understood what I had become. I was not the watchman anymore. I was the curator of what this place wanted to keep. And when the cassette clicked and rewound, ready to play another confession, I waited in the dark and let it begin.